Okay, this is going to be the review for Chapter 30. I'm going to go over a quiz and then go through my notes and then do a quiz live. So just going through this quiz. Question 1. If actual unemployment rate is equal to the NAIRU, then, well, that means at that point that there is only frictional and structural unemployment. There is no cyclical unemployment. And that happens when we are at potential output, so when actual and potential output are equal. The table below provides hypothetical unemployment. What is the unemployment rate on March 1st? So just this data here. So total employment or total population doesn't matter. Unemployment rate is just the unemployed people divided by the labor force, and the labor force is the people working plus the people that are looking. So our stock of unemployment is 750. So 750 on the top, and then our bottom is going to be 750 plus the stock of employment, 9,800. And that gives us 7.11%. Sweet. If labor markets have perfectly flexible wages, as the market clearing theories suggest, involuntary employment would. So we'll go over what those theories are real quick. So market clearing theories. So what market clearing theories say is that real wages adjust instantly to shifts in AD/AS. So if our demand shifts from D to D2, we see instantly that wages change from W0 up to W2, and the quantity of labor increases like that. It's an exact increase like that. We see that there's no cyclical employment, and we say that there's no involuntary unemployment. That means that employment, there is no unemployment where it's the choice made by workers. So there's some problems with these theories, which include that employment tends to be quite volatile, but wages remain steady. So employment will fluctuate, but you have a contract with your workers over 3-5 years, so the wages that you're paying them are steady throughout that period. So it won't be a shift exactly. And also we see that a large fraction of unemployed workers collect employment insurance. And in order to collect employment insurance, you must be actively searching for a job. So it's hard to say that you are not voluntarily unemployed. But this theory suggests that involuntary unemployment would not exist. Wage contracts are often set for periods for up to 3 years. As a result, fluctuations in aggregate demand and aggregate supply tend to cause changes in the amount of involuntary unemployment. So again, because those wages are set, some people can get into work and some people can't. Other things being equal, a macroeconomic shock that leads to an inflationary output gap would. So an inflationary output gap means that AD has shifted over here, and in inflation we have, inflation means more employment. So if we have more employment, the unemployment or employment that results from shifts in aggregate demand or supply away from potential is called cyclical unemployment. So we see that there's a decrease in cyclical unemployment because we're in an inflationary gap. We have more employment. Consider Canada's employment insurance program, which provides benefits to eligible unemployed workers. If this program is designed such that benefits are more generous in regions with higher rates of unemployment, then we can expect that. So what that means is, in regions, this is true, in regions where there are higher unemployment rates, you generally get benefits for longer. You get a certain amount of money every month, and they'll give it to you for more months because they assume it takes longer to find a job. What does this mean? Well, it means that people are going to stay in these areas for longer because they can essentially collect a free ride off the government for longer. So what that means is that these people who are otherwise structurally unemployed, they don't have the correct skills, but they will delay moving because they don't have to. And that's going to increase structural unemployment, and the NAIRU is directly related with structural and frictional unemployment, so anything that increases frictional or structural will also increase the NAIRU. Refer to the figure at E0, the unemployment rate is 5.6%, so at this point. Therefore, so this answer is actually wrong. I emailed Dr. Johnson about it. The answer should just be question 1 with the wording they've given here. So with the wording they've given here, the NAIRU is 5.6%. That's true because we're at potential output, so that means that the natural unemployment rate is equal to the employment rate. Cyclical unemployment would be 0 at this point, not 5.6%. And then the economy is at full employment, but it's not at full unemployment. That's just nonsense. It's not a real word. So this statement is technically false, even though Pearson's marking it correct. Unemployment rates among workers in the 15 to 24 age group tend to. So this is the youth. They're usually larger. There's a larger turnover of workers in this age group because, when you get your first job, it takes you a couple to find something before you find something you like. So there's a larger turnover, which means a larger unemployment rate. So that group has higher, and an influx of workers in this age group into the labor force would tend to increase the NAIRU. If there is an increase in any group of workers that wasn't working previously, so when the baby boom happened, we had a large increase of youth. That increased the NAIRU. We've also had a large increase of women. That has increased the NAIRU. And vice versa. After a bunch of the baby boomers retired, we had a decrease in the NAIRU because we had a decrease in the participation rate. Many economists believe that there are more strict rules for quantifying for employment insurance benefits that were introduced by the federal government led to. So what they did was they made it stricter. It was harder to get a free ride off the government. And what did that do? Well, that lowered frictional unemployment. I know it's kind of hard because it raised structural unemployment in the first one, and this one lowered frictional unemployment. The thing that the textbook says to kind of differ between them is that structural is really long-term frictional, because in the short term, if you are unemployed, it's probably frictional. Maybe you've quit your job, maybe you've been laid off. But in the long term, if you're not working, now you probably don't have the right skills to get into that job set. So in the long term, it's structural. In the short term, it's probably frictional. So this is talking about a short-term concept. And suppose the Canadian government implements a new program to provide training to unemployed workers. The government is likely trying to reduce. So remember, structural unemployment, is just when you don't have the right skills. So if they're training you, they're trying to give you the right skills. So that would reduce structural unemployment. So going through the notes here, these are the learning objectives that I took down. And then this is a graph of the Canadian unemployment rate. So you'll notice these points here, A, B, C, D, and E, that's when the NAIRU was equal to the unemployment rate, so when we were at potential output. And you'll notice this red line here, it's a downward trend over time. So over time, our NAIRU has had a downward trend. But on the other hand, labor force has increased every year since World War II. The three causes of that are a rising population every year, increased participation by various groups like women, and the net immigration of working age persons. There are more people coming into the economy who are working age than are leaving. So measuring unemployment here, there's a couple problems with measuring unemployment that we're not really able to take into account. So if there's been a long recession, a lot of people who are searching for jobs may become discouraged. And in order to be classified as unemployed, you have to be actively searching for a job. But if you've become discouraged, then you're no longer considered unemployed. So if everyone who didn't have a job decided to stop searching for a job, it would appear as if our unemployment rate was 0. but that isn't really true. So just because the unemployment rate falls doesn't mean that those people have found jobs. It may just mean that they've become discouraged. It also fails to take into account underemployment. So many people who are laid off or are searching for a job may temporarily take a part-time job. An engineer who can't find a job right away might take a job at Starbucks. It's not really something that uses their qualifications well, and that should be taken into account, but you can't really. There's a little formula here, which is just the average duration of unemployment, and that's the stock of unemployment divided by the monthly outflow from unemployment. So the total number of unemployed people divided by the amount of people who get jobs every month, and that's how long you'd on average be unemployed. So if the stock of unemployment was 1 million people and the outflow from unemployment was 400,000 persons per month, you'd just divide those two and you'd see on average you'd be unemployed for 2.5 months. So there are costs to unemployment. If there are workers who want to work but can't find a job, that's a loss of output and one that can never be recovered. So there's lost outputs. There's also personal costs. If you're unemployed, it's going to be hard for you to support your family. That's kind of obvious. So we talked about market clearing theories. That's just when everything happens instantly, wages adjust. They're not really realistic, and they're also not consistent with what we've developed in this book. We talked about sticky wages, so this doesn't take into account sticky wages. So the next part here is the non-market clearing theories. So this suggests that cyclical employment exists because real wages do not adjust quickly, and it's more consistent with what we've developed. So what it shows here is, this is the demand and supply for labor. So let's say the demand for labor increases to D2. Well, if we're reading down here, actually we'll do the other one first. So let's say that demand falls to D1, this lower line here. Well, wages may only fall to W1 prime over there. Let me get my pencil right here. Right, so it's fallen all the way to here. We want it to be there, but that would be a market clearing theory. This is a non-market clearing theory. This is saying that wages are over here. And now, this is the amount of labor that is demanded, but this is the amount supplied. There's an extra amount supplied, right? So, because employment, employment is determined by the amount demanded, so employment is going to be down here, and this distance here between these two is our involuntary unemployment. There are people that want to work at the given wage rate, but they cannot find a job. And then opposite on the other hand. So in order to explain why wages clear, there's 4 reasons why wages don't clear. The first one is long-term employee relations. So usually you set wages for multiple periods, multiple years, in which case they wouldn't clear every year. Also, it's important to maintain good relationships with your workers. They probably wouldn't like if you were decreasing and increasing their wages randomly all over the place. And also that has to do with job security. So you would probably take a job that paid less if it had increased job security. That's kind of the theory there. The second one is what they call menu costs, which is just that most firms sell a vast variety of products that they call their product menu. And changing the wages and prices in response to every single fluctuation is a costly and time-consuming process. So they don't for every fluctuation, and hence wages may be higher or lower depending on the demand or supply shocks. The third one is what they call efficiency wages. So that is the theory that if you pay a worker a little bit more, then they're going to like their job more. They're going to put more effort into their job, and they're going to be more efficient because they don't want to be fired. Because if they're fired, they're going to have to go to a competing firm that's going to pay them less. So it makes them more efficient to pay them a little bit more. And the last one is unions. Unions will bargain for higher than normal wages, which benefits insiders but hurts outsiders. We've talked about unions before. So They talk about how the employment insurance contributes to structural unemployment. And I talked about it briefly, but I'll go over it a bit more. So there are two reasons. The first one is that the benefits are collected for longer periods in higher unemployment rates, which is what we said. So that encourages people to stay in these regions for longer because they know that they can continue to get a free ride. And the second one is that EI requires a certain number of weeks worked in order to be eligible for it. It's called the entrance requirement. And if that number is low enough, it encourages seasonal workers not to find a job in the off-season. If the entrance requirement is only 4 months, then you can work 4 months of the year, and then you can collect just employment insurance for the other 8 months of the year and do nothing, and then just work in that one season, right? We talked about this. So structural is the wrong skills. Frictional is more normal turnover of stuff. Now changes in the NAIRU. So this is a little bit confusing, but I'm going to try to go through it. So anything that alters the amount of adjustment between firms, occupations, sectors, or regions, or anything that alters the ability of the labor force to make these adjustments will change the NAIRU. So some specific examples. The first are demographics. So if there's a rise in a participation rate of any group that wasn't participating previously, like a younger demographic or women, that's going to increase the NAIRU. That'll increase the NAIRU. The second is this thing called hysteresis, which is a Greek word that means lagged effect. The example they give is if there is a recession, there's going to be a lack of jobs. And people who haven't had a job previously won't have any experience. So when we get out of that recession again, it's going to be even harder for those people to find jobs because now they have no experience to put on their resume. So they'll be unemployed for longer. And that will raise the NAIRU. In Europe, they have more heavily unionized labor forces. So in times of high unemployment, workers will want increased job security. They don't want to become unemployed. So they'll bargain for that. And this will make it harder for outsiders to find a job. And it will lock in that high employment because that pressure from outsiders will fail to lower wages because the unions have bargained for it that way. And that will raise the NAIRU. The third reason is globalization and structural change. So we're having an increased amount of globalization right now, which increases the rate at which labor is reallocated across regions. So that was anything that alters the amount of adjustment between firms. So the problem with globalization is now Canadian labor markets are increasingly affected by foreign demand and supply, and the NAIRU is going to tend to rise because of that. Policy and labor market flexibility. So policies like the EI increase structural unemployment and therefore raise NAIRU. Anything that increases structural or frictional is going to raise the NAIRU. And things again like the European job security. It's like in Europe, if you fire someone, you either have to like pay them or you have to. It's a lot harder to fire someone in Europe. So they have increased job security. That's it for notes. So I'm going to do a test, chapter 30. Okay. If the actual unemployment rate is equal to the NAIRU, then actual and GDP are equal. We talked about that. 7.1, we talked about this too. If labor markets have perfectly flexible wages, talked about that. Labor term contracts are an important feature of, well, they're an important feature of non-market clearing theories that we talked about. In contrast to a world with continuous bargaining of wages and employment, the existence of such contracts leads to a labor market in which involuntary employment is possible. So non-market clearing is possible. Other things being equal, a macroeconomic shock that leads to an inflationary output gap results in a decrease in cyclical unemployment. It's not going to change the NAIRU, right? Because NAIRU is the natural rate of unemployment, and it's like potential output. It's at the same level. So it's not going to change that, but it will decrease cyclical unemployment, and I think we saw that one before too. Employment insurance program, if the program is designed with more benefits, then we can expect structural unemployment will increase, right? Because we've had this question too, they're gonna stay in their regions for longer. The NAIRU is likely to be affected by all except which of the following? Okay. Demographic shift, yes. Employment insurance, yes. Globalization, yes. And labor market flexibility, yes. Those were the 4 in the notes. So recession is the only one, right? A recession just means that we have a recessionary gap, and that doesn't change the natural employment level. Unemployment rates among workers in the 15 to 24 age group tend to be higher than the overall unemployment rate because of that high turnover. An influx of workers in this group would tend to increase the NAIRU because they previously were not in it a lot. Many economists believe that more strict rules for qualifying for employment insurance benefits that were introduced led to lower frictional unemployment. Frictional is short-term structural. And suppose the Canadian government implements a new program to provide training to unemployed workers. That would be reducing structural. Awesome. All right, that's the end of that video.